And now, ladies and gentlemen, rolling right along with our bombastic review, we have a great show for you tonight.
Paul Lynde made America laugh for decades. But on July 18, 1965, something happened in a San Francisco hotel that changed everything. His friend fell from an 8th floor window while Paul desperately tried to save him. After that night, the jokes got sharper. The drinking got worse. The man who delivered perfect one-liners on Hollywood squares was drowning in guilt. His final years tell a story Hollywood tried to hide, one that explains why the laughter always felt so desperate. Paul Lynde was born on June 13, 1926, in Mount Vernon, Ohio. His parents, Hoy and Sylvia, ran a meat market, and their large family of 6 kids lived in an apartment right above it. His dad also served as the local sheriff, which meant Paul spent part of his childhood living above the county jail. The small town had just 15,000 people. Everyone knew everyone's business. This world of small-town gossip and daily drama shaped Paul's sharp, watchful humor. He sang in the church choir, won a scholarship to summer music school, and performed in school concerts. Even after fame came, Paul always spoke fondly of Mount Vernon. He credited it with teaching him resilience and the values that helped him make it in showbiz. When Paul was 18, tragedy struck. His beloved older brother Cordy, who was just 21, died in 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. At first, Cordy was listed as missing in action, leaving the family in torment. His body wasn't found until 1949. By then, grief had already claimed both of Paul's parents. They died within weeks of each other, broken by the weight of their loss. Paul was only 23 and suddenly alone in the world. That deep heartbreak shaped him forever. His biting humor, his self-deprecating jokes, these weren't just for laughs. They were his armor. His comedy was a way to survive the sorrow that never really left him. Long before he dreamed of Broadway, Paul had already been swept up by the magic of performance. He was about 4 or 5 when his mother took him to see the silent film Ben-Hur at the local theater. The grand chariot races, the epic sets, it was a lightning bolt. From that day, he was hooked. Movies became his escape. He would sneak off to see Laurel and Hardy or Buster Keaton, losing himself in their world of humor and wonder. That early spark from Ben-Hur set him on a path that led all the way to the stage. In high school, Paul made sure people noticed him. He played bass drum in the school band, booming his way through performances. He also sang in the choir and was a soloist in school concerts. He wasn't an athlete or a top student, but he was the class clown. Jokes helped him deflect teasing about his weight and mannerisms. Humor became his shield and his spotlight. He graduated in 1944, already aware that making people laugh was more than a defense. It was his calling. After high school, Paul went to Northwestern University in Illinois. He joined in 1944, studying speech and drama. He wasn't just another student. He was surrounded by future stars like Charlton Heston, Cloris Leachman, and Patricia Neal. Paul became known for his outrageous humor and wild stories. He joined Phi Kappa Sigma fraternity and acted in campus plays, sharpening his unique style. He graduated in 1948 with solid training, lifelong friends, and a ticket out of small-town life. That same year, at 22, Paul moved to New York City. He juggled late-night stand-up gigs at No. 1 Fifth Avenue, with day jobs as a busboy, waiter, and soda jerk. The crowds were tough. The pay was worse. But those grueling years shaped his craft. He learned to read a room, time a punchline, and survive in a city still reeling from war. His break came in 1952, with New Faces of 1952. His monologue about a disastrous African safari, where he stood on crutches and delivered a hilarious tale of misfortune, became a sensation. The show ran for hundreds of performances and made it to film. Paul's dark, subversive humor stood out in a time when most comics played it safe. He wasn't just funny, he was unforgettable. Yet success didn't come easy after that. For 8 years, Paul took whatever gigs he could. Guest spots on radio, small parts on variety shows, voice roles where no one even saw his face. He performed tirelessly, sometimes at several venues in a day. He became known in comedy circles as a genius, even if the wider public hadn't caught on yet. Things began to change in 1960. Paul became a regular on The Perry Como Show and The Red Buttons Show. Now, millions saw him every week. He was part of the Kraft Music Hall Players, working alongside big names like Don Adams. TV was taking over American entertainment, and Paul was right there, stealing scenes with just a few lines. All this time, the pain of losing his parents in 1949 stayed with him. They had both died in their early 50s, just months apart. Paul was far from home, trying to make it in New York, when the news came. The double loss left him deeply scarred. Friends said that grief fueled both his brilliance and his struggles. His humor had a shadow to it, one that made people laugh, but also hinted at the sorrow underneath. When Paul Lynde got the part of Harry McAfee in Bye Bye Birdie on Broadway in 1960, his life changed. The show opened on April 14, 1960, at the Martin Beck Theater. It poked fun at the frenzy over Elvis Presley's draft. Paul played the confused suburban dad, and people loved him. His line, "Ed Sullivan? I love Ed Sullivan," became famous. Everyone copied it. Critics praised him. The New York Times called his performance brilliant comic invention. That one role made Paul a Broadway star. It also changed how audiences saw the musical comedy father. No longer just serious or strict, the dad could be funny, awkward, and sweet at the same time. Even today, people say Paul's Harry McAfee proved that a supporting role could steal the whole show. Paul's success on stage led to something rare. When Hollywood made the movie version in 1963, they didn't replace him with a bigger star. They kept Paul. He returned as Harry McAfee, joined by Dick Van Dyke, Janet Leigh, and Anne Margaret. The film came out on April 4, 1963, and made over $13 million. That was a big number for the time. Paul's comedy worked just as well on screen. His scenes, especially the kids' number, became favorites. Critics said Paul made every scene better. People across the country fell in love with his style. Part sarcastic, part warm. The film's success showed just how much a great supporting actor could shape the mood of a comedy. In 1962, right between the stage and film versions, Paul took a chance. He made a comedy album called Recently Released. It was his first, and Columbia Records produced it. The album captured Paul's humor, much of it drawn from his Harry McAfee role. At the time, most comedy albums were by stand-up comics like Bob Newhart. Paul's album felt different. It was full of characters and theatrical sketches. It sold over 50,000 copies in the first year. That was impressive for a Broadway star trying something new. Critics loved how Paul mixed theater and sharp jokes. His success made other stage stars think about recording, too. Today, collectors pay high prices for an original copy of Recently Released. After Bye Bye Birdie, Paul became a regular on TV. He appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, The Dean Martin Show, and The Hollywood Palace. Millions of people saw him every week. His mix of deadpan and flamboyant humor made him stand out. He even got to guest host some episodes. That didn't happen often for Broadway stars. By 1964, he had been on over 30 variety shows. He proved that actors from the stage could shine on live television. These appearances also set the stage for his future as the beloved center square on Hollywood Squares. Paul's film career took off in 1963. He played Professor Quigley in Disney's Son of Flubber. That movie made over $22 million worldwide. Paul's role was small but memorable. He also starred in Under the Yum Yum Tree with Jack Lemmon. Paul played a nosy landlord and, once again, stole scenes. His timing was perfect. Critics noticed. These films showed that Paul could take his stage charm and make it work on the big screen. On July 18, 1965, Paul Lynde and a young actor named James Bing Davidson checked into the Sir Francis Drake Hotel in San Francisco. The place was famous for its luxury and for the many stars who stayed there. Paul was already a known face in Hollywood, and Bing, who was just 24, was hoping for his big break. He had come from Nebraska and so far had only managed to land small, uncredited parts in movies and TV. That afternoon, they left their bags in the room and went out to enjoy the city. The two were loud and full of energy. Even the hotel staff noticed them. When they stumbled back around 2:30 in the morning, drunk and rowdy, security had to step in. They escorted Bing to room 822 because he was making such a scene. What started as a fun night soon turned into a nightmare that would haunt Paul forever. The night had been one long drinking spree. Both men could handle a lot of alcohol, but Bing, especially, was known for his wild side. The more he drank, the crazier he got. By the time they got back to the hotel, Bing's blood alcohol level was 0.27. That was more than 3 times the legal driving limit in California at the time, which was 0.08. At that level, a person's body barely listens to them anymore. They're confused, clumsy, and can't think straight. For Bing, this meant disaster. His love for risky stunts mixed with that much alcohol was a recipe for tragedy. Moments after they got back to the room, Bing decided to show off. With a grin, he told Paul, "Watch me do a trick." Before Paul could react, Bing opened the window of their 8th floor room and tried to climb out. At first, Paul thought he was just playing around, maybe standing on a ledge right below. But then Bing's face changed. The smile vanished, and fear took over. "Help me! I'm slipping!" he cried out. There was no ledge. He had stepped out into nothing. The alcohol had dulled his senses so badly he hadn't realized what he was doing until it was too late. Paul rushed over in terror. He saw Bing hanging on by his fingertips, 8 stories above the street. Without thinking, Paul grabbed his friend's wrist and tried to pull him back. But Bing was heavy, swinging wildly, his legs kicking as he tried to find something, anything, to stand on. Paul shouted at him to grab his neck to help, but it didn't work. Bing's grip was fading fast. Paul tried again and again, but he couldn't lift him. Gravity and Bing's weight were just too much. Those few seconds felt like a lifetime. Then Bing's strength gave out. Paul watched in horror as his friend fell. He plunged 80 feet to the pavement, landing just 20 feet from the hotel entrance. People on the street saw it happen. Help came quickly, but it was no use. Bing was pronounced dead at 3:15 a.m. at Harbor Emergency Hospital. The fall had caused massive injuries, and there was nothing anyone could do. For Paul, that night changed everything. The memory of trying and failing to save Bing never left him. The newspapers mentioned it briefly, but the world soon moved on. Paul didn't. The guilt and pain followed him for the rest of his life, adding to the struggles and self-destructive habits that would later define his career. Paul Lynde made millions of people laugh, but his own life was far more complicated than it seemed on the surface. When he first appeared as Uncle Arthur on Bewitched in 1965, audiences were immediately hooked. The show ran from 1964 to 1972, yet Paul's Uncle Arthur only showed up in 11 episodes between 1965 and 1971. People loved him so much that they often believed he was in the show far more. His biting wit, his campy charm, and his mischievous grin turned Uncle Arthur into one of the most unforgettable characters on television. Paul had already played a nervous driving instructor earlier in the series, but the reaction to Uncle Arthur was so strong that producers created the role just for him. His first appearance as Uncle Arthur aired on October 14, 1965, in an episode called The Joker is a Card. Paul's style, nasal voice, sharp comebacks, won hearts, not just with everyday fans, but with those who saw in him something different and bold at a time when TV didn't dare talk about it. At the same time, Paul was building his film career. In 1965, he played Bullets in Beach Blanket Bingo, a movie that captured the playful, silly spirit of the era. In 1966, he starred with Doris Day in The Glass Bottom Boat as Homer Cripps, where he delivered slapstick comedy with perfect timing. Paul didn't play leading men. He played scene stealers, the funny guy you remembered long after the credits rolled. These roles helped him work with big stars and planted him firmly in American pop culture. Paul became a regular face on television during the 1960s. He appeared in hit shows like The Munsters, I Dream of Jeannie, and The Beverly Hillbillies. Wherever he went, he left people laughing. He had a gift for playing characters who seemed out of place but full of life, and he became a favorite guest for sitcoms and variety shows. TV was taking over American homes, and Paul Lynde was right there, making sure people remembered him. But while Paul was making everyone else laugh, his own life took a dark turn. In July 1965, something happened that haunted him forever. He and his friend James Bing Davidson were at the Sir Francis Drake Hotel in San Francisco. Bing was only 24. They had been drinking heavily. Bing tried to climb out the window, saying, "Watch me do a trick." He slipped. He fell from the 8th floor. Paul couldn't save him. The guilt ate at him. From that night on, alcohol became Paul's way of coping. His drinking got worse. Friends said that when Paul was drunk, he could be mean, unpredictable. He was arrested more than once for public drunkenness. His relationships at work suffered. He tried to stop. In 1980, he finally got sober, but the damage inside never really healed. Then came the job that seemed made for him. In 1967, Paul joined Hollywood Squares. By 1968, he was the permanent center square, the spot every contestant wanted. Over 15 years, Paul appeared in an incredible 1,083 episodes. The center square became his stage. Millions tuned in to hear his quick, snarky, often naughty jokes. His humor pushed the limits of what TV could say in those days, with double meanings and sly nods to things people didn't talk about openly. Even after he left the show in 1979, the ratings dropped, and they begged him to return. His mix of a deadpan voice and cheeky grin made him a star all over again. Mel Brooks once said Paul could make a phone book funny, a tornado warning, even a seed catalog. That was no joke. Paul could take anything and make people laugh. Coming from Mel Brooks, one of the greatest comedy minds ever, that meant something. Paul had a rare gift. Even in a time packed with brilliant comedians, he stood out. His one-liners on Hollywood Squares became legendary. Someone asked why Hell's Angels wore leather. Paul said, "Because chiffon wrinkles too easily." When asked how many men were on a hockey team, he smirked, "Oh, about half." These weren't just funny lines. They were little jabs at social rules and secrets that TV didn't usually touch. His style made the jokes land without getting him banned. People loved him for it. Fans still quote him today, proof that his humor lasts far beyond his time on screen. Audiences didn't just like him, they adored him. He often ranked as the most popular star on TV During his time on Hollywood Squares, people of all ages tuned in just to hear him crack wise. His popularity was so strong that when he left, viewers noticed right away. And when he came back, it was big news. Yet behind the sharp wit and the bright lights, Paul felt deeply alone. He once said, "Love to me is something you buy." He hid behind jokes, but he longed for connection. He kept his private life hidden because he had to in those days. The funny man on TV was also the man who said he would be a terrible husband. He lived alone and got used to it. His humor, the thing that made him famous, was often his shield. Paul Lynde had always dreamed of having his own sitcom. In 1972, that dream finally came true when The Paul Lynde Show premiered on ABC. The show aired from September 13, 1972 to March 14, 1973. Lynde played Paul Sims, a tightly wound attorney and father who was constantly clashing with his genius son-in-law. That son-in-law, played by John Calvin, had an IQ of 185 but couldn't seem to hold down a job. The situation at home was chaotic, with Jerry Stiller and Ann Mara playing the son-in-law's eccentric, divorced parents. Even with Lynde's sharp humor and fame from Hollywood Squares and Bewitched, the show struggled. Critics said it felt like a weak copy of All in the Family. Still, Lynde's performance stood out enough to earn him a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actor in a Comedy Series. But the ratings were terrible, and after just 26 episodes, ABC canceled the show in 1973. The cancellation hit Lynde hard. It wasn't just the end of a show, it crushed him personally. He had put so much hope into it, and when it failed, his confidence fell apart. His friends later said this was the turning point in his life. He became more withdrawn and started falling deeper into addiction. His perfectionism, which had once pushed him to be great, now only made him feel worse. He saw the failure of the show as his own failure. That belief haunted him and made it harder for him to recover. After the show ended, Lynde's addiction grew worse. He had already been drinking heavily since the mid-1960s, but after 1973, it got out of control. He turned to alcohol, pills, cocaine, and marijuana to dull the pain. People who knew him said he changed completely. The funny, charming star became irritable, cruel, and unpredictable, especially when drunk. He started getting arrested for public intoxication. He got into fights. His health and career both suffered. By the late 1970s, his reputation was damaged by stories of drunken outbursts. It wasn't until 1980 that he finally got sober, but by then, the damage to his career and relationships was deep. Even though people still saw him as a comedy legend, at one point he was on TV for 200 hours a year. Lynde hated what his life had become. He felt trapped. Hollywood kept casting him in the same roles. He couldn't show who he really was. He hated the industry. He hated Hollywood Squares. He felt stuck in a character he no longer wanted to play. The gap between what people saw on TV and what he felt inside kept growing. It left him bitter and frustrated. His drinking led to more and more trouble. His arrests for public intoxication became a regular thing in the 1970s. His friends and co-stars like Peter Marshall and Kay Ballard saw it all. They said his drinking was no secret in Hollywood. Sometimes police or studio bosses tried to keep it quiet to protect his TV deals. But the truth was hard to hide. The difference between the funny man on TV and the broken man in real life was shocking. When drunk, Lynde could be mean in ways that shocked even those closest to him. His biting humor turned into cruelty. He would lash out at friends, staff, anyone nearby. One time he even put out a cigarette on his manager's hand in a restaurant. People who had known him for years started to pull away. They didn't want to be his next target. His addiction was tearing his world apart. One of the strangest moments in his downfall came during a flight in the late 1970s. Lynde drank so much on the plane that he ended up losing all his clothes. He got off the plane barely able to walk, wrapped in just a blanket. The story spread through Hollywood, adding to his reputation for wild, drunken behavior. It was humiliating, but it showed just how far he had fallen. In 1977, Lynde was invited back to Northwestern University for homecoming. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he got drunk and caused a scandal. He went into a fast food place and launched into a racist rant against a black professor. The professor made the abuse public, and Lynde's apologies couldn't undo the damage. It nearly destroyed what was left of his career. In 1978, Lynde went to Salt Lake City to tape a segment for Donnie and Marie. That night, someone broke into his car and stole his things, including $1,000. When Lynde told a police officer he was so drunk and aggressive that he ended up getting arrested instead of helped. The producers canceled his contract. It was another lost opportunity, another reminder of how his addiction was ruining his life. In early 1980, Paul Lynde decided to take control of his life. After years of drinking and using drugs, he made a serious attempt to stop. He became sober and gave up drugs. This was a huge and difficult change for a man whose addictions had been famous and had nearly destroyed his career. In the late 1970s, his drinking got worse and worse. He was arrested many times for being drunk in public. He often acted wild and dangerous. People who knew him said he could be cruel and even violent when he was drunk. That was nothing like the funny and kind man he played on TV. At that time, Hollywood wasn't as forgiving as it is now. His image suffered badly. When he finally got sober, his health and career were already in terrible shape. His comeback efforts didn't work. The damage was too deep. His sobriety was a victory for him, but it came too late. It was a sad and final battle he could not win. Years of drinking and drug use left Paul Lynde's body broken by his mid-50s. He became very overweight. His heart was weak. His arteries hardened. When he died, the coroner found he had a serious heart condition and emphysema. These were direct results of how he had lived. A test showed a small amount of butyl nitrate in his system. Some people use this as a stimulant, but the amount was not enough to cause his death. The damage was done by the years of excess. The spark that once lit up a room was fading fast. His body could no longer keep up. Even though he had quit drinking and drugs, his past choices had left scars that could not be healed. In the final years of his life, Paul saw things differently. He gave up hope of becoming a serious actor again. He said, "I feel now it's useless to keep hoping. If I can make people laugh, I'm making a more important contribution." He knew that laughter mattered. He understood that bringing joy to others was his gift. Even though he felt lonely and hurt, he found some peace in knowing he could still make people smile. His sharp wit hid much of his pain. But behind the humor was a man who had been worn down by the ups and downs of fame. On the night of January 10th, 1982, something felt wrong. Paul didn't show up for a dinner party. This was strange. He loved to be with friends, and he was known for being on time. When his friends called him and knocked at his door, no one answered. They saw newspapers stacking up outside. They heard his dog barking again and again. The police told them to wait 48 hours, but they knew something was very wrong. They broke in through a side door. The alarm went off. That small detail proved Paul had been alone. He always set the alarm before bed. His friend's fear had come true. Paul Lynde was found dead in his bed in the early hours of January 11, 1982. He was 55. His friends found him after they broke into his house. Despite wild rumors, he was not naked. He wore his pajamas and robe. His hair was combed. His hand reached out toward the panic button near his bed. The cause of death was a massive heart attack. The years of drinking, drugs, and the damage to his heart and lungs had caught up with him. The house was filled with the sound of the alarm. His dog kept barking. But Paul was gone. He had died alone, trying to get help that never came.